What do the wide receiver and tight end rankings look like after the NFL draft? Jamie's here with his risers and fallers on FFT Express. All right, here we go, Jamie. So give me some wide receiver risers if there were. And it's funny, like only one wide receiver got a big quarterback upgrade in the NFL draft. I guess that was Calvin Ridley. But who do you think should headline the list of wide receiver or tight end risers, I suppose?
Yeah, Calvin Ridley certainly has a guy that I bumped up a couple spots. I'm going to leave the rookies out of this because it's not fair to call them risers. But Calvin Ridley definitely got a bump. Marvin Harrison got a bump. Garrett Wilson got a bump. Just in terms of these are guys that didn't get competition where we thought that they might, and it's a great opportunity for them to, I think, hopefully improve their situations from a year ago. Ridley was clearly disappointing based on some of the expectations. And it was sort of split in two parts because we thought, okay, maybe he'll be the best guy in Tennessee because Will Levis will be better and Brian Callahan will make this offense better. And then he was still sharing with DeAndre Hopkins and it wasn't great for him. And then when Hopkins was traded, okay, now there's an opportunity for him to be, the guy. And, we saw some flashes more so with Mason Rudolph. And that's kind of the hope is that Cam Ward comes in and maybe makes things better for Calvin Ridley. So still a guy that you get at a pretty good value. It's not like I moved him, up dramatically, but he's in the top 30 and somebody that I would consider drafting, especially depending on how wide receivers come off the board as early as round 5. Harrison, again, thought he was going to get some competition as well. I think it was Chris Trapasso maybe was on our show and said he had Matthew Golden mock there in the first round. Again, they're going with the same cast of characters. We just got through on our full-length episode on Thursday talking about Harrison getting a little stronger, maybe a little bit better offseason for him. And hopefully taking a better, having a better year 2 than he had in year 1. And then in terms of Garrett Wilson, we also spoke about him as well in the full length episode. The only significant addition really this entire offseason is Mason Taylor, a rookie tight end. And so while Justin Fields may not be as polished a passer, even as a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers, we know what what Fields was able to do with DJ Moore in 2023 when he had his last, number 1 wide receiver, I think, of this caliber. I don't know if George Pickens qualifies. So for me, all these guys benefited coming out of the NFL draft.
Okay.
And Khalil Shakir as well. I know he spoke about that also, but, a guy in Buffalo that didn't get significant competition. I think Keon Coleman too, for not bringing in any outside threats. Josh Palmer, maybe could be a speed bump for Keon Coleman being better in year 2, but I think both those guys benefit with what the offense looks like in Buffalo.
Did you move Dalton Kincaid up?
So he was right around like tight end 15 pre-draft. I put the 2 rookies ahead of him in terms of Loveland and Warren. I did shuffle some things around, so he's still a tight end 15. But I like the upside. And listen, Brandon Beane, the GM there, keeps saying it, and it's worth noting. Kincaid played through 2 significant injuries last year. Yeah. If he's healthy, maybe we do get that breakout season that we were hoping for a year ago.
And I think when you talk about risers after the NFL draft, one team that stands out as a team that I thought was going to be, full of fallers, and it's Cleveland. And they traded out of the number 2 pick.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Right. And they didn't get Travis Hunter. So I don't know if you moved Jerry Jeudy up or David Njoku, but I'm sure you're feeling much better about them now.
Yes.
Yeah. But what about the fact that they did draft 2 rookie quarterbacks, and we'd love to see just Flacco stick in that job if he's even going to win it to begin with. But I think, what you don't want is that they're struggling after 6 games. Let's just turn it over to one of these rookies. How does that factor in?
So I'll go back to the conversation we had, I think it was on Monday with Heath, where Heath has Jeudy in the teens. And that was my pushback was what happens if Flacco doesn't start the majority of the season and we get these rookie quarterbacks. And he said he was still fine with what the target, I think, I don't want to speak for him, but I think he said he was still fine with the target share and the draft capital of the quarterbacks. I moved Jeudy from like wide receiver 30 to like 25, so what I'll probably do is I could see myself putting him as high as like 22, 23. But you have to factor that in. At least I do. And it sounds like you do also, of no Joe Flacco at some point during the season. That could be a pretty big negative for what Judy's upside could be.
I mean, I also factor in, the last 2 years in Cleveland, you get this Joe Flacco sample size of 6 games, I think. You get this Jameis Winston sample size of around that, maybe 8 games. I just have doubts that Flacco is going to be able to do it for a full season, or even if he kept the job the whole season. I think he's probably good at identifying coverages and getting the right play in, the things that rookies would struggle with, and targeting the right guys, right? He'd feature Jerry Jeudy and Njoku, but I think at the end of the day, they probably don't have an above average quarterback on their team. Just a guess.
Right. And it was sort of crazy. Their run game was non-existent those 5 games. That was,
Yeah. Yeah.
post Chubb injury,
True.
and Jerome Ford was not a bell cow. And he threw for over 300 yards in all 5 starts. Like,
Yeah.
that's no way replicable. He was 2 years younger too. Now, granted, he was coming off the couch. He's played much more football since then, and certainly practiced a lot more football since then. But that was just ridiculously crazy. And he won the NFL Comeback Player of the Year in those 5 games.
All right, we're going to take a break, and we're going to win the podcast comeback of the year. As after we come back, we're going to talk about fallers. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about some rankings fallers. Who do you got?
So, again, we spoke about this a little bit on the full-length episode. The Bears receivers and the Bucks receivers. Just nervous with the additions that they made. In terms of Chicago bringing in 2 high-profile rookies, the number 1 tight end in the draft class in Colston Loveland, one of the, wide receiver sort of, jokers of Luther Burden, who can end up being their slot receiver, which could be awful for DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. So DJ Moore and Odunze lose value to me. And then the addition of Ibuka is, I think, troubling to Godwin, and that trickles down to Evans because Evans was struggling at the start of the season by comparison to the way they finished. And so both of those receiving cores get downgrades for me.
It's interesting. I'm not sure I feel it with the Bucks. You were talking about it on the show. I'm kind of with you. I feel, well, I don't know how you feel exactly. You brought it up. I feel like Ibuka is more of a 2026 guy than a 2025 guy. Looking at their targets in the first 6 weeks of last year, you had Godwin with a 28% target share, 53 targets. You had Evans with a 22% target share, 42 targets. You had Cade Otton with a 16.5% target share, 31 targets. And then you had Bucky Irving, you had Rashad White with a 10% target share, and then some other guys. So you didn't have a third wide receiver there. You did have Otton with the 16.5% target share. I don't know. I'm not that worried about Ibuka messing things up. I with you with the Bears, but for the Bucks, unless Godwin isn't healthy, which obviously I am worried about, I think Ibuka doesn't matter that much personally.
Well, obviously, I agree with the overall sentiment. I do think, though, that when you're starting to nitpick some of these guys, and he's clearly a talented rookie, and this was, whenever you get like these surprise picks of, I don't want to say it's a luxury because they're looking ahead probably to the future and knowing that Evans missed 4 games last year with hamstring problems, and Godwin is coming off a significant injury. They still signed Godwin, though. So did they need Ibuka? No. Do they have McMillan still? Yes. And so it's kind of just putting it all together and saying, okay, McMillan's last 5 games, he was a big piece of what they were able to accomplish against the playoffs. Godwin is coming back to what level we just don't know, but he's still coming back. And what happened to Evans at the beginning of last season was Godwin was better and was not dominating targets, but was getting more targets. So now you're sort of throwing this gasoline on the fire here to, what all these guys are. And so I just downgraded them. I'm not avoiding them, but I downgraded them. Plus, again, you have Evans at 32 years old. This is when we start to see these guys really struggle. So I'll let somebody else reach for Evans. I do think Godwin will end up being a good value pick, though, based on where he'll fall.
I have Baker Mayfield concerns for the Bucks. Topic for another show for our busts episode, but Baker Mayfield, too many negative plays, too many sacks, too many interceptions, way too many fumbles, and he only lost 2 of them. I think he's tied for the league lead in fumbles last year with 13. But yeah, I look forward to getting into the Bucks offense. Should be an interesting one. Set up for success, no doubt, but maybe a little regression. All right, we'll be back next week is when we'll be back. When we win comeback podcast of the year. We come back after the weekend. For Jamie, I'm Adam. Just get out of here, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.